Chapter 10. No plan survives first contact. Baxter was the first down, not needing to be lowered by the cargo arms. When they were in position, he stepped off the edge of the cargo hold and plummeted to the train car below. The moment he landed on the train module, he magnetized his feet and began active scanning along the kilometers of cars ahead of him. He motioned the others down and stalked forward. Jax and Steve came down first, the heavy-duty cable making a piercing whine as it unspooled aboard the Osprey, letting the two men mostly free fall until the last 3 meters. They unclipped quickly and headed toward the rest of the car at a crouch. The pale star that served as a sun for Jebediah was setting. The cables retracted quickly so that Naomi and Corey could hook in and descend. They might have 2 hours before anyone spotted them, but the sun would be down long before that. Once all 5 of them were on the ore car, they headed for the hatch at the rear end of the car. The platform in front of the door was not large, big enough for 2 people at most. Jax jumped down, careful to not fall backward off the car. He looked at the small control panel set in the door. "Looks straightforward. I couldn't get too many details out of my pal at the stockyard, but he mentioned that most of these cars are still set to factory specs, since no one actually cares to memorize security codes for hundreds of these modules." He looked up at his friends. "Once we crack one, should be easier after that." He looked at Naomi. "Right?" Naomi jumped down and knelt next to the hatch and the control panel. After a minute of tinkering in which Jax noticed a familiar blue glow, she looked up. "Abracadabra." The hatch popped and swung in. "Now that I know the default settings, it'll go faster," she said as she stood and entered the internal corridor of the train car. As Steve jumped down to enter the car, he looked at the panel. "She's good. Can't even tell she messed with it." Jax looked down. Yeah, good." He shoved Steve inside to make room for Corey, who was sitting above them, waiting to jump down to the small platform. The ore modules sat atop the bare-bones train car. Without modules, the car would resemble a flatbed with framed-in walkway running down the center. The ore modules, shaped like a squat upside-down U, rested over the walkway and locked into the car with thick latches along the sides at the front and back of the car. Each car could hold 2 modules. The walkway was surrounded by a rigid framework that fit into grooves in the modules to provide a bit more stability. In the middle of each car was a small display mounted to the mesh of the walkway. It displayed which lot number the 2 ore modules corresponded to. Jax looked at the small device. "Not so lucky, not this car." He motioned for the group to continue. Due to his height, Baxter had stayed topside, pacing them from above and keeping an eye out for trouble. As they neared the hatch that would lead to the next train car, Rudy called in. "How's it going?" Their comms were short range only, good for maybe a kilometer at best, less with tons of molybdenum between them and the Valerian infiltrator keeping position overhead. "We just got here. Car 1 is a bust," Jax growled. From the inside, it was easy to unlock the hatch and move across the narrow walkway that connected the cars. The tracks rattled past below. Naomi moved gingerly past Jax to look at the next hatch. She knelt down, careful to keep her body between the control panel and the others. It took half as long as the first to open. Jax said, "Hold tight. We'll signal you when we find it." The second car was a bust. So were the third and fourth. Corey said from the back of their procession, "You're sure this the right train?" "It's the only train," Jax grated, then added, "We've barely covered the first quarter of cars. But you're right in that we gotta pick up the pace." He shoved Steve, who had taken the lead of the group, so the other man would jog the length of the car. They checked 2 more cars before finding the first of 2 lot numbers Jax had been given. "This is it," he said. "According to Ichiko, this is one of the lots that were stolen from his co-op by the neighboring much larger mining corporation." He motioned to Corey and Steve. "You 2 remember the drill on the latching mechanism?" Corey had her hair in tight braids. They swayed as she nodded. "Attach the bypass doodad you gave us, clip to the blue wire, then cut." Green. Green wire, Steve replied, sighing. Oh, right, green. Corey grinned. She batted her eyelashes, her brown eyes gleaming in the dim light. I got this. Steve reached for the device, but was blocked expertly. I'll do it. You head to the rear. You'll see when the latches disengage. Steve frowned, then nodded. Corey looked at Jax and Steve, then kissed Jax on the cheek. Good luck. She looked at Naomi. Keep him safe. The slimmer Japanese woman inclined her head. Jax shook his head. Come on, let's get to the next car so these two can get out of here. He tapped his earpiece. Found one. Stand by. Then he turned back to his friends. Remember, we want both modules. Don't disconnect them, Jax shouted. Corey and Steve gave a thumbs up. Standing by, Skip replied. After Jax and Naomi moved to the next car, Corey leaned out over the narrow connector walkway. The latch controls were meant to be accessed by stockyard personnel, standing on the ground next to the unmoving train. The ground roared by, barely a foot from her head, as she strained to reach the control panel. One of her braids skittered across the gravel that raced by underneath. Absently, she thought about the fact that the train line was sitting on gravel, and given how muddy that part of the planet was, it must have taken a lot of work to get all that gravel in one place. The wiring connected each car to the control center in the engine. The bypass would keep telling the control system that the ore modules were latched to the car like normal. The bypass device would release the two modules, keeping them connected to each other with long bars that slide along the exterior, creating a rigid structure. Using her legs to push further under the train car, while clutching the railing with one hand, she managed to open the control panel, revealing the control lever for the latches and the signal wires. She attached the bypass and cut the green wire. The small LED on the bypass blinked twice, then remained lit. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and flipped the switch. As she pulled herself back up onto the connector walkway, she heard the metallic clang of the latches built into the car, disengaging from the cargo module. Up above, as the latches disengaged, large metal loops meant for the heavy-duty crane at the stockyards slid up and out of the ore module. By the time Corey climbed up to the top of the module, Baxter had secured the harness that Steve designed to both ends of the module. It was now nearly pitch black. Each member of the team had a night vision visor. She pulled hers down over her eyes to see Baxter standing a meter away. Steve was at the far end of the train, his side attached to the frame. The matte black combat droid walked past her and effortlessly leapt to the next car in the line. When he landed, he said over comms, "See you both soon." There was a metallic twang as the reinforced cable went taut, the Osprey using her powerful grav lifts to pull the ore module off the train car. The Osprey rocked, and her engine noise ratcheted up a couple of decibels as she tilted wildly. "Okay, this is harder than I expected," Skip said over the speakers. Rudy was gripping his console, even though his rollerball was magnetically secured to deck. The smart material had flattened a bit, so more surface was in contact with the deck. "Yeah, you don't seem to be doing a good job at this." The Osprey tilted the opposite direction. "What's the problem? You've piloted the Osprey hundreds of times over the years." "Of course, but never with such a heavy load dangling underneath messing with the flight dynamics," the ship's SI replied. "Hold on." The ship shuddered and banked. "I am," Rudy replied. "We need to hurry." "I know that." "Then why are you not heading in the right direction?" The ship lurched and tilted wildly. "My bad." So far, so good, sorta. Jax and Naomi were 4, maybe 5, they'd lost count, ore cars from the car they'd left the others in. They were at the hatch to the car that was coupled to the mystery car that was blocking the Osprey sensors. Rudy and Skip had thus far had no luck picking up any transmissions from the train's engine, or anywhere else on the train, prior to departing with Steve and Corey and their first ore module. Naomi was doing her glowy blue interface thing on the locking mechanism when the lock clicked and the hatch swung in to reveal a bored-looking shock trooper. "Oh, hell," Jack said, pulling the shocked woman to the side of the hatch as the trooper shouted something and raised his carbine. Blaster bolts shot through the open hatch to score the car behind them. Jax leaned in and returned fire. He looked at Naomi. "We can't let them call this in." He leaned out to fire again, and this time, Naomi crouched and then bolted through the hatch, tackling the shock trooper. Jax groaned and charged in behind her, leaping onto the free arm of the armored man fighting with his small attacker. Glowing blue attacker, Jax noticed. As Jack struggled, he swatted at his ear. "Rudy, are you back? I need you to jam all comms." Naomi wriggled and generally kept the trooper busy as she tried to hold on to his helmet, her hand lined with glowing blue tattoos. "Grab his comm gear," Naomi shouted. Jax reached for the trooper's equipment belt, ripping the comm gear off, breaking the connection to the armor in a shower of sparks. "We're almost done dropping the ore module off," Rudy replied. Jax growled but didn't reply. He was still busy with the armored man underneath him. The trooper pushed Naomi up and away as he slammed a fist into Jax's midsection, driving the air from his lungs. In a flash of black hair and blue jumpsuit, Naomi was back, clinging to the back of the still-sitting trooper, trying to force the man's helmet off. Her hands, and what was visible of her arms, were glowing brightly. Jax couldn't tell what she was doing, but it must have been distracting. Jax finally came to his senses and pushed his pistol under the struggling trooper's arm and fired once. Then again. The armored man slumped and stopped thrashing. Smoke wafted up from a glowing burn hole in his armor, under his right arm where the armor was weak. Jax gestured to the logo of the Grand Human Empire on the hatch leading to the mysterious train car. "Guessing that's full of these guys." He hitched a thumb over his shoulder toward the dead trooper inside the car behind them. Naomi made a face. "You think?" She looked at the hatch. "What do you want to do?" "We can't take an entire train car of shock troops." "I can," Baxter said from the roof of the car behind them. The two humans turned to look up at the matte black combat droid, or at least his red optical scanner scatter light as it swished back and forth. The rest of him blended in with the moonless night. The droid stepped off the car, landing with a thud on the walkway before them. "You two, up and over. I can jam comms within a small radius. I'll take care of our Imperial friends." "This train pulling into the station full of dead shock troops won't be subtle," Naomi pointed out. The combat droid shrugged. "Neither will it pulling in missing 2 entire cars' worth of ore modules." Jack smiled. "Point the combat droid. Still, an ore theft is one thing. Slaughtering what must be an entire company," he said as he scrambled up the rungs to the roof of the Imperial troop car, "is a whole other thing." Naomi knelt next to the control panel, her hand resting on it. The blue biological circuitry tattoos lit up briefly, then faded. She looked up, winked, then followed him up the ladder to the roof of the military transport car. Baxter climbed up the ladder of the car and connected to the military car. "I'll have to wait here. I'm certain they'd hear my heavy ass stomping along the top of their car." Jax looked over. "Good call. We'll hurry." The combat droid nodded and crouched down. And then, sideways. "Jax," it was Skip, "we're on site. Be over you in a second." Naomi looked around until she finally caught sight of the lift engines burning. From below the train car, Jax said, "Good job, buddy." He was dangling from the connecting walkway between 2 cars. They had found the second and final ore 2 cars up train from the Imperials. Rudy's voice crackled. "You have to hurry. The train is getting close to the oh-no zone, like really close. Be on station in 30 seconds. Naomi cut in. "You ready?" She was standing atop the car, watching the Osprey approach. Jax replied, "Yep, activating bypass now." The control panel was open, and he connected the bypass device. The LED was solid. He cut the wire, and the LED on the bypass device went out. He stared at the device, then slammed his palm on the side of it. Nothing. "All good?" Naomi asked. "Our ride's here?" Jack stared at the cut wire and the presumably broken or malfunctioning bypass device and its criminally dark LED. "Oh well, yeah, more or less." He reached for the lever, turned it, then hoisted himself back up onto the platform. "Let's get this done." Above him, the Osprey roared overhead. The sound of locking latches along both sides of the car releasing was faint over the roar of wind and clickety-clack of the train. When he climbed to the top of the ore car, Naomi already had the makeshift harness connected to his end of the car. The Osprey had flown up the length of the train, picking up Baxter along the way. The combat droid was connecting the harness to the loop on the end closest to Jack's. The droid turned. "You broke something, didn't you?" Naomi looked up, eyebrow raised. "What makes you say that?" Jax held up a hand. "You know what? Not now." He looked at Naomi, who gave a thumbs up, then looked up at the Osprey. "Skip, let's—" The module lurched, throwing Naomi out of view at the far end of the train car. Jax barely held on. The module began to rise. He didn't hesitate. He turned and leapt from his position at the opposite end of the module to the car below. "What the hell are you doing?" Baxter demanded over the comms. He was standing, magnetically affixed to the center of the module, directing Skip. "Jax," Baxter said. Over the comms, it was hard to tell, but for a second, Jax thought he heard concern in the normally stoic combat droid. "Naomi fell off," Jax said. He had landed with a thud on the small connecting platform between cars. "I'm okay," she reported. He couldn't see her. She was somewhere below the now exposed walkway that ran the length of the empty ore car. "Jax, I think the jig is up," Skip said. Rudy added, "Yeah, you did something. I've got encrypted comms coming and going from that troop transport car." "I'm picking up life signs, too. Those shock troops are spreading out from their car up and down train," Skip said, then added, "And I've got what look like 2 shuttles inbound from Salma." "Head to the staging area. Finish the job. They'll spot you in seconds," Jax ordered. "We're not supposed to meet with Ichiko's people until—" He looked at the old wristwatch he wore. "Tonight. That's plenty of time for things to cool off. Naomi and I will lie low and find a ride to you or wait and let you come get us," Jack said, as he started toward where Naomi was, which had the added benefit of being away from the Imperial shock troops that were making their way up train. The Osprey continued to rise and banked away from the train. "Stay safe, you idiot," Corey said over comms. When he reached Naomi, she was nursing her right leg. "You okay?" "We'll hide?" she asked. He shrugged. "I said, or something." He pointed to her leg. "You walk?" He extended an arm to help her up. She reached up. "Yeah, I think it's just twisted." She eased up and tested her weight on the foot. She looked up at Jax. "Yeah, I'll be fine." She smiled. Another upside of being an interface, healing nanites. "Sweet," Jack said, then looked toward the rear of the train. Somewhere a few cars away were Imperial shock troops. He turned back to the smaller woman. "We gotta go." He gestured to the control panel. She knelt down and unlocked the hatch. They both rushed in and closed the hatch behind them. Naomi looked around. "Thoughts?" Jax walked further inside the train. He was tapping his chin as he turned in a slow circle, looking around the narrow, caged-in walkway. "Your blue, glowy power. That's touch-based, right?" "Blue, glowy?" the slender woman repeated. She shook her head. "Yeah, I have to be in physical contact." Jax nodded and continued to look around. She turned toward the hatch leading further up the train. "Should we keep moving forward?" Jax shook his head. "No real point. Eventually we'll hit the engine, then what?" Naomi leaned against the side of the walkway and slid to the ground. "They'll kill us if they catch us." She looked up. "You know that, right?" Jax smirked. You're the one that literally forced your way into this. She returned the expression. I didn't literally force anything, but yeah, I get it. She stamped her foot against the floor of the narrow walkway. It made a hollow thud sound. Jax turned and looked at her. She looked up. What? He rushed over and knelt down, shoving her aside. There's a hatch here. Hey, she shouted. You could have just asked me to move. He looked over. Sorry. He turned his attention back to the hatch in the floor. They were standing a few feet from the center of the train car. He ran his hand along the hatch, looking for a locking mechanism or something that would open the hatch. He looked at Naomi. Can you do your glowy blue thing? She completed, her eyebrow raised. She got to her feet and moved next to him, resting her hand on it. The blue lines began to glow. I was going to say magic, but yeah, Jack said, his eyes on hers. The hatch sprang open between them. Naomi smiled. Still never sleeping with you. She removed her G-phone from her pocket and hefted the hatch open. She turned on the flashlight and peered inside. She looked at Jax. Must be mechanical access. Inside the hatch was a maze of pipes and pistons. Several were moving as the train car shifted back and forth. Be a tight, greasy fit. Jax consulted his G-phone. Less than an hour to Salma. He leaned over to look inside the mechanical area, then turned and looked at Naomi. No choice. He extended an arm toward the small opening. Naomi groaned and lowered her way down into the narrow crawl space. Jax followed and pulled the hatch shut.